so welcome everyone. We're looking at Shakespeare. This is an introduction to Shakespeare and his works. It is not a comprehensive look at Shakespeare by any means, but it is meant as an introduction. When I did Shakespeare as an undergrad, I did it as a full year course, so it went fall and winter semesters. And we covered, believe it or not, 15 plays. That's a lot. It was basically a roller coaster ride, very, very quick, heavy reading. And I spent the summer reading Shakespeare plays while working in a biochemistry lab, folding cardboard boxes. That was and then putting stuff in it. $1,000 a month, or some extraordinarily low sum of money. But inflation. It was still bad though. But I got to read Shakespeare, and it was good. One of the reasons I thought that was a good thing to do is it takes time to get through Shakespeare's plays, not just because of the volume, but because you want to pay attention to it and try and understand something of what you're reading. And to do that, I always recommend that people read it aloud. It is a drama. It was meant to be performed. You can't really replicate that while you're reading, and there's nothing you can do about that. But I do think there is benefit from reading it aloud in terms of appreciating the work and the cadences of the work. And when I come to teach the sections in which we're engaging with the dialogue or multiple characters, I will read them aloud for you to try and help you pick up the iambic pentameter. And you will find that if you start reading it rightly, it will aid your understanding. The poetry is written in such a way that it needs to be read metrically. But it is iambic pentameter, it's blank verse, there's no rhyme. So it is also supposed to replicate people's speech as much as possible. All the same, if you go see an actual production from the Royal Shakespeare Company or so forth, you will find that it sounds a little bit different than people just talking. There's something artificial about it. And Shakespeare makes no apologies for that. It's part of his view of reality that he presents it in poetry and not in prose. We live in a very prosaic age in which we think that our own thoughts are best represented in an immediate fashion without artifice or guile or simulation. It's called being transparent or open. And we think that the best way to express that is simply through saying whatever's in our heads. That's not Shakespeare's view. It's not the view of any of our predecessors up until very recent times. And I am mindful of C.S. Lewis's comment on the chronological snobbery of our age. One of the features of which is that we tend to think that we are the most enlightened of people. We're also the most honest. We're the most free from prejudice. And part of that is our sincerity with one another. The word sincere, by the way, means without wax. So in terms of, in the ancient world, you could, in weights and measures, you could add wax to hold little pieces together. The weight would be lighter, and so you could weigh your goods and it would be worth more then. You don't put as much fruit and vegetables on the one side of the scales, and then you've got a weight here and it says, oh, it's this much, and you get paid more. So to be sincere is to use proper weights and measures. So in terms of sincerity of speech, we're saying we're not going to use any artifice, we're not going to add anything, we're just going to present ourselves just as we are. It's candor, it's truthfulness. Again, that is not how Shakespeare and any of his contemporaries would regard art and its relation to nature. So that's one of the issues that we're going to see is going to strike us when we read not just Shakespeare, but any writer prior to the 19th century, is that it is conspicuous in its artistry. You can notice that it uses literary figures, it will use rhyme, it will use meter, it will use literary language, and it will make no apologies for doing so. And it's not because it's trying to deceive us, it's because there is a belief inherent in that presentation of ideas and character that there is a rational order to all things and a harmonious order to all things to which we belong. And by removing the order, we're removing the harmony. We're removing something of the song and dance of creation. Like taking hedges down. Saying, what's the point of that hedge or a fence? You take it down. It's a barrier for me running across the field. But the hedge has a purpose and a function. The great works of literature are written in poetry, Shakespeare no less. Although he's writing drama, he's writing in a form that we would probably best describe as poetry. Very rarely does he break from that. When he does break from it, by the way, and writes in the speech of the commoners, he's showing people that are not schooled, not educated, needing to be harmonized, be regulated. Their lives are a little disordered. And he'll also show it when people lose their minds. They'll go from speaking in blank verse, iambic pentameter, unrhymed, to losing the meter in their speech. It expresses something of their loss of their own integrity of their minds. And he's doing that through the metrical way in which he expresses it. I think most people these days, when they read Shakespeare, they don't even pick this up. And that's because we're not taught poetry in schools. Or when we are taught poetry, it's stream of consciousness, bilge. People just write, well, this is how I feel, I'm going to write it down, and I call that a poem. Again, that's the product of a benighted age. That's our age. Shakespeare lives in a very different world than ours. And but his world is the world of humanity all the way up until the last 2 centuries. So in that sense, Shakespeare's he's not doing anything new. He's fitting in with the way everyone would have considered life best understood through the forms of metrical and orderly presentation, whether you want to see it in music or whether you want to see it in painting or in architecture. In architecture, there's conspicuous form. Engineered reality works in a certain way. Try building a bridge without observing the laws of geometry and mathematics and harmony and order and proportion. Doesn't work. The same analogy applies to the sphere of humanity. There's an order, there's a proportion, there's a design, and God has set those in place, Shakespeare firmly believes. It's a pagan view, but it's also a Christian view. And it begins right in the beginning, Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then he orders it on 6 days. And then at the conclusion of each day, and there's evening and the morning, the first day. And what you get from reading Genesis and observing the orderliness of it and the repetitiveness of it is that there's almost a harmony. There's a song, there's a dance that's going on there. Later writers will explicitly, and even more explicitly than Shakespeare, present it, like Tolkien in the Silmarillion, where the whole of creation is sung into being. Lewis will do the same thing in The Magician's Nephew, where Aslan sings a song and things come about. And the early Christian view of song is exactly that. It is prayer put to music. Again, evangelical prayers tend to be spontaneous, artless, unmeditated, formless, and often purposeless. You don't even know where you're going to begin. You don't even know what you're going to say to start speaking. Is that the best form of prayer? How do you know that it's going to be a God-honoring prayer or one helpful to you if you haven't even given it any thought? It expresses something about our view of human nature. We think that our feelings are central to who we are, but not our minds. Huge problem. And that there's no form outside of us that we ought to imitate and to regulate ourselves and help ourselves. Product of the Romantic period as much as anything. Yes, sir. Yes, to reduce. Yes.
Often to
That's a great observation. Yes, so the point, we're trying to reduce the barriers of entry to the point where we know longer what we're entering into. Well, the problem with removing every barrier of entry is it also removes the barrier that lies between truth and falsehood, and beauty and ugliness, and all of the very things that are contradictory. That's a product of the pantheism of the 19th century as well, and the inclusivism. Pantheism, it's all gods. Gods are everywhere. And who am I to distinguish between the gods? It's divine. Well, except that if the universe is governed by justice and there's good and evil, then everything is not divine. Some things are demonic. Shakespeare will clearly hold to that view. And we, even if we're Christians, will hold to that view, but in practice, do we actually see any dividing lines there? You're right, though. That's the aim. We're trying to remove the barriers to entry. Mm-hmm. Are you trying to get on my good side? Makes you think of Paradise Lost. That's good. Yes, it is.
And it needs to be.
Yes.
Even though it's unclear what outside the garden exactly needs to be walled out.
The command to Adam is to tend and to keep the garden. To tend and to keep. And the keep is in be vigilant, protect. So even though the original sin we see in Eve's transgression of God's command not to eat of the fruit, Adam allows it to happen. It's his job to be vigilant and not allow it to take place. So when he separates from Eve, he's actually, and we're going to blame her for being the first to fall, but in many ways, he's let his guard down. He is the guard. He was charged to be the guard. It's not just be fruitful and multiply. You're supposed to wall that garden. Absolutely. And that remains the job of adults with children. You got to put a wall around that. You have to put a barrier in front of the staircase, or keep the kids away from the fireplace or from the stove. You must do that. That burns. They'll learn by experience, but you don't want them to have that experience. They don't need to learn by experience. Not everything is learned experientially. It can be learned through simply observing the forms of God's creation and being wise about how you instruct towards that. But you're right. But this idea of removing all the barriers, the ways of entry, is just letting the guard down. And of course, when you do that, all manner of bad things come. A question at the back. I'm going through my syllabus, but this is fantastic. Your thought? Go ahead. Oh, yes.
So it's like, oh, if you use big words or if you put in an effort, it's seen as you're trying to be better than other people. But
true.
It's this sort of thinking that if you use big words or,
complicated, less common words, yeah.
Then they're like, oh, you're trying to be better than me. Like everyone has to be equal, but the equal is everyone is dumbed down.
Yeah, the standard of equality has to be of per necessity low. It's the lowest common denominator. How can you build a culture if not only the barrier or the initial entry point is the lowest common denominator, but the community is going to continue to operate in accordance with the lowest common denominator? Then you have a place where children are comfortable, but no adult can tolerate. No adult can tolerate being in a nursery forever. But although my illustration already showed, well, nurseries still have rules and fences and hedges, right? But really reducing it, yes. And I am sympathetic to the objection against highfalutin language, using words just to show off. That's not helpful. People can use words just to try and protect themselves and to try and intimidate others, but they can also use words because of that precise word that you're using is exactly the point, and you want to make a just distinction between truth and falsehood, and sometimes they lie very near to each other, like this near. Jesus is the Son of God. Arius says it, Athanasius says it. They both say Jesus is the Son of God. One's a heretic, the other is a bastion of orthodoxy. What's the difference between the two? Athanasius knows that Arius is a heretic. Arius is very popular, by the way. Everybody ends up persecuting Athanasius. It's Athanasius against the world. Athanasius says, okay, Arius, you'll say that Jesus is the Son of God, and I say that Jesus is the Son of God, but we don't mean the same thing. How do I flesh this out and flush you out so that everyone can see that you're a heretic and departing from the true faith? And they'll both say, so Jesus is the Son of God, okay. But Athanasius will say that Jesus is God the Son. Will you say that, Arius? And he says, no. Right. So you're denying the divinity of Christ. That's what you're doing. So when you say that he's the Son of God, you mean it in a different sense than Christians do. He's Son of God in some way that we are all sons of God. We're related to God. There's a special relationship of some sort. We're in his family, but we're not claiming the full divinity of God as Christians would have. And thus, Christian Trinitarian declarations will talk about God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Not God, not the Son of God. It's like flip them around, although it really only works there. So that's how he disambiguates it. So again, very careful attention to language and making sure that we say the right things in the right way so that clarity is there. And sometimes words need to be disambiguated because the word, we're going to find this in Shakespeare an awful lot, that words like nature, we're going to get a lot of discussion of nature, let's say in Shakespeare's Hamlet, which we'll be coming to, a lot of plays on the word nature. In English, it means many, 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 many different things. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But if you just use the word nature, I'm just being natural, going back to the lowest common denominator discussion, we end up with romantic views of nature where everything that's natural is good. Because nature is always good in the romantics' view. But that's not the view of anyone before the romantics. Nobody thinks that nature is good. Among other things, that alone would show you nature is not good. But so would all sorts of other things that occur in the realm that we call nature, earthquakes, floods, just signs of natural disaster. Is nature good when it causes evil? Well, that leads to the problem in the Enlightenment where they want to explain, where does evil come from if nature is good? There's a real problem, the problem of evil. Anyway, I'm going to spend too much time doing interesting discussions and not getting through just the intro of the syllabus here. Meeting on Fridays, well, you see all that. I'll just skip over that stuff here at the beginning. And the actual material, I have taught this course. I said to you at the outset that I myself did 15 plays. When I did 15 plays, I did some of these, and but in addition, I also did many of Shakespeare's history plays. I'm not including his history plays in this, which is unfortunate. But it's just it's one semester. I can't do everything that I did there. And I would want to do the history plays together because they're often presented sequentially. So Richard II is followed by Henry IV, part 1 and part 2, and Henry V. It's called the Henriad. And you can see the progression of thought through historical sequence like that. And they're, tetralogies then. And what Shakespeare is then going to illustrate is the way in which God's providence works through English history. And he will be using all of the literary devices that he will use in these plays, but he's doing something different in the history plays. So let me say something about that. And it's simply this. I guess I'll note this here. I'll do it after the break. Let me go through the syllabus and then I'll pause this briefly and then I'll give my little introduction. So we begin with A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is a romance. It's one of the later plays that Shakespeare writes. He will write more or less begin with comedies. His early plays are comedies. And I would say closer to medieval in their construction. The lot you can see in common in his early plays that he's learned and he's leaning on medieval ideas as much as anything in the early comedies. And then he goes through the history phase. I'll put this on the board afterwards. I'll write it out. And then he has a period of the tragedies, the majority of which of our time here in this on this course will be dealing with the tragedies. He's got 4 great tragedies, but most of his great works are tragedies, which is itself interesting. And then he concludes with romances. This one, A Midsummer Night's Dream, A Winter's Tale, The Tempest. Those come right at the end of his life, and they're very magical. You can almost see the magic in them, as we would call it. And I'm going to begin with that, and I'll explain why I do that when I come to it. But we'll begin with A Midsummer Night's Dream. So half a class and a full class. Then we'll go on to Measure for Measure, which is one of his so-called problem plays, because it's not clear which genre it even fits in. It's a problem for the critic. How do I categorize this? Because it ends up rather well, which is the feature of a comedy, but it's very dark, which pushes it more in the tragedy direction. It's not clear until the very end that it's going to resolve itself and end up well. So this is a romance that's very comic. This is a comedy that's very dark. And again, here in The Tempest, we have yet another romance. So I'm really heavily leaning into the romance side of things for a specific purpose, which I'll reveal as we go through that. And I'm going to do that all the way up till reading week. And then I will look at 3 tragedies: Macbeth, King Lear, and Hamlet. And I've dropped Othello, which I sort of hate doing. But I wanted to deal with The Tempest and some of the themes in there. I think he's most Christian or conspicuously Christian in his plays as he goes forward. And I wanted to bring that out by looking at The Tempest, which I used to not teach. So I'll look at 3 of his great tragedies, and which are among his most popular plays. We could have Othello, we could have Romeo and Juliet, for that matter, another hugely popular play. Again, a tragedy. But that's the sort of the landscape that we're going to use for the course. The usual means of evaluation: essays and a final exam. When we had more students in the class, I used to have performances for the students. If you really want them, I can include it back in and change it. The way it worked is I got you to put on a scene from Shakespeare's plays. One, I'd nominate a director, or you would nominate a director from amongst yourselves. You break up into two groups in this case. You nominate a director amongst yourselves, and then you stage the play. You would not be assessed for your acting ability, but more for your interpretation of the lines. So you would, if you want to, you can wear props, have a plastic sword or, a crown that you put on. And, but it's you're delivering the lines, and it's your interpretation of them. And you ask questions afterwards. So it's to get you thinking like an actor. That's the purpose of it. If you want to, I can include that. We'll talk about it afterwards. I haven't included here because the numbers were a little bit low for that, I thought. But we could do it, and it does have benefits in that case. The class participation would be that great. And then 2 essays in the final exam. So that will be the roadmap to it. Oh yes, course bibliography and all that, relatively brief. Any comments about what we're going to look at and when? And if not, I'll pause this and then I'll talk about Shakespeare's worldview, if you will. Although I've already given a few comments about that right at the beginning, or at least about his use of poetry as opposed to prose in presenting his characters on stage. No? Comments or questions about the syllabus? You can ask them after as well. Okay, let me pause it there.